Hello everyone. Lor'themar Theron was not always the Blood Elf Reagent Lord of Quel'thelas, but time and events, it pushed him into a role that he never saw himself fulfilling. Instead, one of the first times that we see him pop up in the story, that is as a High Elf Farstrider lieutenant. With their magical fount of power, known as the Sunwell, the High Elves, they'd created quite a nice kingdom for themselves, but the local Amani trolls, they were not too happy with their neighbors. They built their city upon sacred ancient troll ruins, so a long feud existed between elf and troll. Now to protect their lands, they had the Farstriders. These are amongst the elite when it comes to the rangers. Trolls and elves, they clash with each other, usually the elves coming out on top, until one day, led by Zul'jin, the trolls managed to capture a group of high elves. These high elves had gone out to investigate a defective runestone. Runestones that kept them safe against the superstitious trolls, but also prevented outsiders from detecting their use of magic, and it weakened the magic of all non-elves within it. But when they went out to investigate, the Amani were waiting to ambush them. Liadrin, Dar'Khan and Galel, they were captured, and even Lieutenant Lor'themar Theron was taken as a prisoner. Prisoners, but not killed, because Zul'jin was looking for information. The witch doctors, they used smoke to pacify them. With the smoke, there came visions, and as the smoke veil parted, a troll was squatting down in front of Liadrin.
I think we should retake our land, burn your pretty buildings, send you running back the way you came. But it won't be easy. You'll be tricky.
He reached to his side and drew a 3-foot-long, wave-bladed dagger.
Your runestones make our magic weak. Your own magic be protecting your cities. But I've been watching. I've been thinking.
Zul'jin patted the point of the blade against his temple as he squatted down in front of Lor'themar now.
I think you get your power from that fountain of light. What you call it, the Sunwell? Yeah, I think it gives you the power. And without it, maybe your magic not so great after all.
Zul'jin traced the tip of the blade down Lor'themar's stomach and chest, barely brushing the surface of his skin.
I wanna know how to overpower the runestones. I wanna know everything about that Sunwell and its defenses.
So, Liadrin thought, they do not know how to sabotage the runestones. He stood and looked toward Liadrin and the others.
Your friend here. Maybe he don't talk. He be a ranger, no? They a tough breed. But you see him get skinned alive. Hear him scream till he got no more breath left. Maybe one of you think twice. Maybe one of you talk. I'll give you a chance right now. One chance.
Zul'jin looked first at Liadrin and then at Dar'Khan. He glanced quickly at Galel, whose eyes were still closed. There was a long moment of silence.
That be no surprise to me. You too proud. Maybe you like the fighting, the killing. I'll tell you something. We gonna fight till there be no more of us left to fight. You gonna see what we be made of.
Eagerly fingering the tip of his blade, Zul'jin squatted down inches away from Lor'themar.
But first, I'm gonna open you up and see what you be made of.
No!
Liadrin shouted.
Get away!
Her head spun to Dar'Khan, her eyes imploring him to take action. His own eyes shot to her, wide with fear. At that moment, he looked very lost and completely helpless. He shook his head. His ability to cast had not yet returned. The dagger's tip pierced Lor'themar's skin just below the navel. Zul'jin drew the blade down in a long vertical slice.
It not gonna be quick.
Liadrin immediately attempted to call upon the light to begin healing the wounds, but the smoke still acted as a wall in her mind. As for Lor'themar, he did not cry out. He was intently focused on the task that he had begun mere seconds before. He had regained a measure of mobility in his hands, and he worked now to coax out the miniature blade that he carried under his belt. Blood flowed freely. Zul'jin thrust his spindly fingers into the open wound, and now Lor'themar screamed. And that's where Lor'themar's story ends. Thankfully they were able to put up a fight against Zul'jin and his followers, which allowed Dar'Khan to gather his powers and they teleported away. This event developed quite a strong bond between them. Some even wondered if Lor'themar, if he would have made quite a good catch for someone like Liadrin. However, there never really seemed to be the time to develop anything romantic, as the High Elves had to face many challenges and dangers in their time. For example, the world of Azeroth was invaded through the dark portal by the Horde, and they teamed up with Zul'jin and the Amani. They even dared to strike at Quel'thelas, but even the Horde, with all its might, with Zul'jin and all his cunning, and the legendary enslaved red dragons with their ancient wisdom and untold strength, not even that could overcome the magical shield, powered by the Sunwell of course, that protected the Elves' capital city. With the support of the Alliance armies, Sylvanas Windrunner and Lor'themar, her second in command at the time, they pushed up from the south under the command of Sylvanas' remarkable sister Illyria. The Horde's primary force drove west, abandoning this hopeless siege of Quel'thelas for the chance to strike at the humans' capital of Lordaeron, leaving behind Zul'jin and his Amani trolls, as well as scattered pockets of invaders that had been cut off from the locust of the conflicts. Illyria, Lor'themar and the Alliance armies, they pushed the Horde, while Sylvanas and a robust Elven contingent, they remained behind to eliminate the lingering threats. Now, as most of you know, the Alliance would claim victory over the Horde. First, they defeated their siege at Lordaeron, a battle that Lor'themar was present at, and then their final defeat came at the Blackrock Mountain. The Elves were even able to capture Zul'jin, but the Amani troll, he wouldn't give up that easily. Despite the Elves cutting out one of his own eyes, he chopped off his own arm to make his escape, and this made him a legend amongst his people. Now Zul'jin and the Amani, they would remain a threat for quite some time, while Lor'themar, he went from lieutenant to ranger captain, and now, after his heroic deeds in the Second War, he was appointed by Sylvanas herself to become Alar Analas, or Ranger Lord of the Farstriders. "Shoulder your burdens well, child of the sun," she told him, and burdens aplenty for Lor'themar to deal with. His friend Dar'Khan had become quite jealous over how all of them had risen up in the world. Not only a Ranger Lord, but Liadrin, who would become a High Priestess, and Galel, who had moved out of his apprenticeship and became a full and proper priest. Dar'Khan felt passed over when they decided not to make him the Grand Magister, so he worked on his own plans and schemes to get that recognition and power that he so very much desired. Nothing would stand in his way for this, and the opportunity came when Arthas the Death Knight, he'd set his eyes on Quel'thelas to use the powers of the Sunwell to resurrect Kel'thuzad. Dar'Khan heard his dark voice in his mind, and he provided knowledge on their defenses, information that he'd effortlessly gleaned from Lor'themar. Their protection, though one even greater than those runes around their land, that is called the Gatekeeper, or Ban Diniorel. It is this magical dome, empowered by the Sunwell, that has kept them safe for so many centuries. Now, they could have just Elves cast their magic and keep it up and running, but that was a bit impractical. Instead, they had 3 crystals on 3 key locations hidden away to anyone who didn't have inside knowledge. It was these crystals that kept their shield going, and it was these crystals that Arthas was informed about. When the army of the dead marched onto their lands, Lor'themar and his forces, they were patrolling, and they uncovered that someone or something had taken a moon crystal at Antalas. Quickly, he pushed his forces to check out the second temple, Andarov, and there they were greeted by the same sight. That crystal was gone as well, only this time in the area it was littered with the dead bodies of the temple guardians. Now, in fighting against the Scourge, the dead don't remain so for very long. The Guardians, their former allies, they rose up once more and they slaughtered Lor'themar's party. The Ranger General himself had no easy time dealing with his adversaries. Fire burned in his thigh and sword arm as the last corpse's blade rent flesh. Lor'themar was breathing heavily now, expended from its burst of speed. He lashed out at the wrist of the closest attacker, slicing off its sword-gripping hand. The corpse lunged forward before the Ranger could counter, raking at his face with the hand that remained. Searing pain flared in Lor'themar's eye, sending jolts of white-hot agony throughout his head and body. He knew in an instant that his left eye was useless, and without the intervention of a healer, it probably would be for the rest of his life. That is, if he lived past the next few minutes. Now, luckily for Lor'themar, Halduran and his troops, they showed up to save his life. There was no time to have someone take care of his eye though, not while the undead still marched upon the kingdom. The High Elves did everything that they could to try and stop Arthas, but with the inside knowledge and an elf fighting against him from within, there was simply no stopping him. Despite the many that lay down their lives, like King Anastarian Sunstrider with the legendary Felamalorn, or even Sylvanas Windrunner, now turned into a Banshee, none were able to end Arthas' life. The high home of the High Elves, it fell, and the powers of the Sunwell were corrupted in the act of bringing Kel'thuzad back as a lich.
Citizens of Silvermoon, I have given you ample opportunities to surrender, but you have stubbornly refused. Know that today, your entire race and your ancient heritage will end. Death itself has come to claim the high home of the Elves.
By the time that Lor'themar and his Farstriders made it back, it was already too late. Best they could do was gather all the survivors that they could find and fight back against the wandering dead to maintain a vigil throughout the ruined capital in the wake of Arthas' departure. Doubt and fear spread through Lor'themar's mind. Fear that his old friend was the one who had betrayed them, and he, unknowingly, had helped him to do so. When Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider finally returned home, it was Lor'themar who showed him to the place where the body of his father had been placed after they'd recovered it. The prince paid his respects to his father, but the time for grief and mourning, that would have to wait, as after inspecting the Sunwell, they came to a horrible conclusion. The resurrection of Kel'thuzad, it had corrupted the magical energies, and if they did not do something, then that corruption it would spread through the land and even to their people. Even though the Sunwell was the birthright, their fountain of power, it had to be destroyed. Now some of the High Elves, they protested of course, but eventually they realized that they had no other choice, it simply had to be. On top of that, Liadrin informed them that the trolls were gathering and getting ready for an attack. They too wanted to claim the Sunwell, so Kael'thas decided that they would deal with the corruption, with the remaining undead and the assaulting trolls in one single strike. As Liadrin, Lor'themar and several others, they kept their enemies at bay, Kael'thas, Romath and Astalor, they worked on their spell. Each of them held one piece of the Key of 3 Moons, which was recovered after Arthas had done with it. Now the battle outside, it was fierce. Zul'jin had set his eyes on the Sunwell for quite some time, and now he thought the moment had come. Lor'themar swung his blade fiercely, sometimes missing because of the lack of depth perception, resulting from the loss of his eye. Still they fought on, while the Magisters did their work. Romath, Kael'thas and Astalor backpedaled as the pulsating pillar of blinding white engulfed the violet hues of the Sunwell. It radiated outward with a loud hum that muted all other sound. With one final push, it pulsed, then snapped back to the Sunwell center. The hum was replaced with a sudden silence, broken only by the sound of rain hammering the earth. Now, Kael'thas screamed, stretching his arms wide. One by one, the Farstriders, the healers, and finally the Magisters and Kael'thas himself, they disappeared as the blinding white beam exploded outward, vaporizing everything and everyone in its path. And when it dissipated, it left nothing of the Sunwell but a dark and empty hole. The High Elves made the impossible choice of blowing up their Sunwell to prevent the corruption from spreading. Kael'thas Farstrider now found himself taking over from his father, but he refused to name himself king. He told his people that Anastarion was their king and will always be remembered as the last king of the High Elves. For now, they had to focus on what is most important: healing. The attack on our people and the destruction of the Sunwell mark a new and dark chapter for us all. But we shall adapt, and we shall prevail, and we shall rebuild. We must put this misery behind us. We must enter a new chapter. And so, I say to you that, as of this day, we are no longer High Elves. In honor of the blood that was shed throughout this kingdom, in honor of the sacrifices of our brothers and sisters, our parents and our children, in honor of Anastarion, as of this day, we will take the name of a royal lineage. As of this day, we are Sin'dorei. We are Blood Elves.
Glory to the Sin'dorei.
Blowing up the Sunwell, it was a very difficult choice, one that had to be made. But the now Blood Elves, they soon enough discovered that millennia feeding on their well, it had left them with quite an addiction, and now they had no source of power to feed upon. Though Kael'thas was troubled by this new development, there were more immediate dangers that consumed his attention. The Scourge were still in firm control of Lor'themar. As long as the undead roamed the nearby land, the Blood Elves would never know peace. If Kael'thas and his people were to rebuild the kingdom, they needed to help the remnants of the Alliance defeat the Scourge. Though Kael'thas' father had seceded from the Alliance before, that did not stop the prince from lending his aid to the faction. He gathered his healthiest soldiers and journeyed into Lor'themar to join the fight against the undead. Lor'themar was appointed to serve as Reagent Lord in Quel'thelas and watch over the rest of the Blood Elves in his stead. The prince would then meet up with the racist Gerithos, and his dealings with this aligned commander that would eventually push him into an allegiance with Lady Vashindanaga as well as Illidan Stormrage. Turned out that the path to saving Quel'thelas, that did not lie on the world of Azeroth. It lay beyond, on a world now known as Outland, homeworld of the orcs that invaded the planet. Together with Illidan and Vash, they claimed the planet, but the Demon Lord killed Jaden. He was not quite done with Illidan yet, and he ordered him to take care of his wayward servant, ordered him to take care of the Lich King. Back on Azeroth, they did their very best to stop Arthas and the Scourge, but the prince, he would prove to be far too powerful, which meant that he merged with the Lich King, while Illidan and his forces, they were forced to retreat. Now while all of this was going on, back home, the massive explosion, it had not destroyed the Sunwell's power. The Fount's energies had simply scattered across the land, which was discovered by the red dragon Coriastras. He was deeply concerned that this unprotected magic, it would draw the attention of different factions and igniting another conflict. His fears were soon enough proved to be correct. Malygos, the blue dragon aspect of magic, he too sensed the presence of the Sunwell's energies, so it was that he dispatched one of his servants, the blue dragon Kael'thas, to investigate just how far this power had spread. The Lich King also felt the ripples of energy cascading from the fount. He ordered the now undead Dar'Khan to collect his power in the name of the Frozen Throne. Now, to protect the powers of the Sunwell, he decided to hide it away in plain sight. With his magics, he transformed it, disguised it as a human girl named Envina Teague. Memories and a life included, so that not even she truly knew who she was. Same for those who would abuse those powers, but as we read in the Sunwell comics, that secret would not stay hidden for very long. It's quite a long tale, and I have done a separate video on it, but Lor'themar, he shows up just around the end of it. By that time, the Blue Dragon Kael'thas and his friends, they've already found Envina, and they're trying desperately to keep her out of the hands of the now undead Dar'Khan. He is able to steal her away though. Another attempt at claiming that delicious power, so they go after her, a journey that takes them to Quel'thelas. In that time, Lor'themar, Halduran and their crew, they're still busy fighting off the undead, dreaming of a day when they will be able to renew Quel'thelas, a dream that seems to be more distant every day. Their scouts has spotted Dar'Khan, who boldly dared to set foot near the Sunwell, something, as you might imagine, the Blood Elves can't really appreciate. They surround him, ready to claim vengeance for what the traitor has done to them. But the resurrected undead, there's so many that they're forced to retreat. It was then when Lor'themar ran at the Kael'thas as they battled against the mighty demon. Only thanks to the help of the Queen of the Forsaken, Sylvanas Windrunner, and her Banshee Scream were they able to slay the beasts. Sylvanas has been able to regain control, set herself free from the will of the Lich King, and has no love for Arthas and still remembers what position she once held. Now Lor'themar, he wants to know from Kael'thas what his connection is to the Banshee, but Kael'thas has no idea what he's talking about. All he's here for is Envina and Dar'Khan. At first, Lor'themar doesn't want to listen to the half-blood that claims to be a dragon. Now a magical collar around his neck, it was preventing Kael'thas from transforming, but luckily his friend Tyrigosa, she had no collar restraining her and was able to quickly end the discussion. Lor'themar kneeled down and begged for forgiveness for his words. They then joined forces in an attempt to take on Dar'Khan and save Envina. A fight that was not easily won, as Dar'Khan is no pushover, especially with the Lich King backing him up. But in the end, Envina realizes who and what she truly is, and not even Dar'Khan can hold a candle to the might of the Sunwell. She decides to stay with the Elves. This is where she belongs, so Lor'themar and his band, as well as Kael'thas, they decide to stay with her and keep her safe. All of them, even Sylvanas Windrunner, they promised to keep her real identity a secret. Meanwhile, Kael'thas, he had not forgotten about his people, and working with Illidan, it had taught him many things, including a way to sate the magical addiction. All they had to do was drain magic from creatures, objects and the environment to sate their cravings for magic. It was Grand Magister Romaf that brought these teachings from Outland to the people, and while some accepted a new path, others did not. They flat out refused to suck magic from living things, like they were vampires or something, and for that, Lor'themar exiled them. His intention was never for them to die, but he could not afford to lead a nation divided. Those that were on board, they worked hard on rebuilding their kingdom, while some amongst the Blood Elves, they took it a little bit too far. People like Galel, for example, who had witnessed such atrocities in the war against Arthas and the Scourge. He lost himself to their addiction. It became so bad for him that he ended up stuffing arcane crystals down his veins, laughing like a madman and striking out at Liadrin. She in turn had no choice but to defend herself and strike him down. But perhaps his fate was the kind one. We also have Wretched, that are Blood Elves that lose themselves completely, stepping away from their society in search of their next hit, their next fix-up magic. Not an easy time for Lor'themar to lead his people, that's for sure. Difficult choices had to be made, while the prince, he was still in Outland. There, the Demon Lord killed Jaden. He was thinking of a way to stop Illidan, who was working very hard at finding his own permanent way of stopping the Burning Legion. He was busy training his demon hunters. He laid claim to Outland, but he was also very secretive about his plans, even to his closest allies. Sure enough, he had taught Kael'thas how to drain magic and keep the addiction under control, but the Blood Elf prince, he thought that the demon hunter was holding out on him. Desperate to find a more satisfactory source of power, Kael'thas looked to Fel magic. The more he fed on that dark energy, the more it ate away at his mind, body and soul. His reliance on Fel magic, it frayed the bonds between him and his people. Though he was desperate to save the Blood Elves, he secretly became paranoid of them. He was convinced that they saw him as a failure. The truth was that Kael'thas' journey to Outland, it had not helped his people, it had only made their suffering worse. The wise option, that would have been to cut losses and return home, but the thought of marching into Quel'thelas without a lasting solution for his people, it filled him with shame and anger. It was this pride, this inability to admit defeat, that eventually sealed his fate. Lor'themar, he had promised to keep Envina a secret. Not even Kael'thas was told about her, but the Reagent Lord knew that the time had come. It was time for Kael'thas to come home again, and Lor'themar believed that the only way to bring him back was telling him about Envina. Messengers were sent out to inform the prince, yet these messengers would never reach him. Kil'jaeden, he knew of their plans. He had agents nestled throughout Azeroth, including Quel'thelas. The prospect of restoring the Sunwell to its former glory, that would just give Kael'thas hope, and that was not what the Demon Lord needed. He wanted the prince to be desperate and uncertain about the future, until he was firmly under Kil'jaeden's control. So it was that no hope was given to the prince, and the whispers continued. When a group of his blood elves decided to lay down their arms and join Adal and Shefrev, Kael'thas' resistance to Kil'jaeden's words, it gave up, it vanished. He had enough of this. He did not trust Illidan, and he decided to team up with the Legion. He and his forces left the Black Temple and settled in an area known as Netherstorm, where they quickly took over the dimensional fortress known as the Tempest Keep. Inside, they found an unexpected surprise. There was a Naru called Mu'uru, which they sent over to Azeroth for the Blood Elves to drain. Some amongst them, like Lor'themar, they were hesitant about draining a creature of the light, but others, including Liadrin, they embraced his path. She and those who followed in her footsteps, they became known as the Blood Knights, the Blood Elf Paladins. Yet despite these new forces and the new meager ways of dealing with their addiction, Quel'thelas was still in turmoil. Packs of undead roamed the land, while their ancient enemy, the Amani trolls, began launching attacks again. Lor'themar had few resources to protect his home from these threats. The kingdom's army, it was in tatters. Wretched walked the streets. Prince Kael'thas had still not returned. The latest news that Lor'themar and his people had heard from the Shattered Realm, it did not bode well. The Legion was gathering in great numbers for reason unknown, and a large portion of Kael'thas' Blood Elves had abandoned the prince. They knew that Kael'thas was vulnerable, but Lor'themar could not leave Quel'thelas undefended while he launched a campaign to assist the prince on Outland. It was clear that the Blood Elves needed allies, and they would not find them amongst the humans, dwarves, gnomes, or the Night Elves. Kael'thas' decision to join Lady Vash and Illidan, it had soured relations between Quel'thelas and the Alliance. So it was that their answer came from the most unexpected source, Sylvanas Windrunner. The Banshee Queen had joined the Horde with her Forsaken, those that had liberated themselves from Arthas' control, and she urged the Horde's leadership to ally with the Blood Elves. Her reasons, her motivations, they remained a mystery. Rumors circulated that some lingering part of her that had still sympathized with Quel'thelas and its hardships. Other stories hinted that Sylvanas had ulterior motives. Whatever the truth, she arranged for War Chief Thrall and High Chieftain Cairn Bloodhoof to convene with Lor'themar and discuss such possibility. Despite the Elves' history of bitter warfare with the Orcs, Lor'themar was receptive to the idea. He knew that this horde was different than the one that had ravaged Quel'thelas in years past. He was also painfully aware that time was running out for his kingdom and for his prince. In turn, Thrall and Cairn, they saw great promise in the Blood Elves. The people of Quel'thelas, they proven their courage and resolve while fighting to protect their kingdom from outside threats like the Scourge. Thrall and Cairn also believed that the Horde and the Blood Elves, that they needed each other to survive the days ahead. They extended the hands of peace to Lor'themar, and he accepted. This alliance, it would benefit both sides. While the Blood Elves now had an allies to call upon, the Horde gained another strategic foothold within the Eastern Kingdoms.
We find strength in the Horde.
It was during the time period of negotiating with the Horde that moment came where Liadrin had to strike out at Galel, their little band of friends, a bond forged while captured by the trolls. It had definitely seen better days. Times changed, people changed, but there were some things, like Lor'themar's admiration and affection for Liadrin, that over the years had remained very much the same. He'd made sure to supply her with arcane crystals while she was spending time in the Ghostlands, something that he didn't have as much need for as others of his kind. For some reason, the Rangers in general, they seemed less affected by the magical dependence and withdrawal. That, of course, was not the same for everyone, like Galel, who fell to their addiction. Dar'Khan had already fallen to his dark ambitions, yet despite Envina unleashing the powers of the Sunwell upon him, he was not out of reach of the Lich King. He resurrected his servant once more and put him on a new task. This time, not to claim the powers of the Sunwell. Instead, the Lich King wanted these new Blood Knights converted into his ranks. Scheming and plotting, Dar'Khan laid out a trap to serve his master. But unfortunately for him, Lor'themar, he uncovered what he was up to, and he confronted a man that he hated with such a boundless passion. Though he no longer wore his wide-brimmed hat, the undead mage still retained a penchant for finery. Yet his silken robes barely served to conceal this emaciated corpse beneath, little more than a skeleton wrapped in decomposing grey flesh. Dar'Khan's flashing hair had turned brittle, the color of yellowed parchment. His eyes had turned white, and a host of flesh-eating insects traversed his reanimated form, trundling and writhing across atrophied skin and muscle. The undead mage, despite being undead, was no easy prey. He used his skills and powers to burn the Reagent Lord alive, but as one, the Blood Knights worked together to heal him. The sensation of being burned alive quickly diminished, replaced by the splendid warmth. The power of the light bathed Lor'themar, drove away the all-consuming flame, and its absence left only radiant serenity. This gave him the chance he needed to shoot an arrow straight into the head of his old friend. Dar'Khan fell to a knee, and immediately his form began to dissipate. As he clutched at the shaft protruding from his skull, the mage had time enough to emit one final mournful wail before his broken body turned fully to smoke, spreading thin and dispersing into the air seconds later. Once more, Dar'Khan was taken care of, but he has come back so many times now, and he would do so again in the future. Problems for later though, as with their acceptance into the Horde. Lor'themar, he explained to Thro and Cairn the problems with his prince, how he desired to find him, and the threat of the Legion. The news about the demons. It was deeply troubling. Yet Thro and Cairn, they were very wary of venturing to Outland. Soon enough though, they would have no other choice, as Kil'jaeden, he wanted Azeroth to come through the Dark Portal and fight Illidan for him. The Demon Lord is cunning and deceiving. He has many ways to manipulate events to work into his favor, but that part of the story we'll save for next week.
You are not prepared.
For now though, I really hope you enjoyed the story of Lor'themar so far. Thank you very much for watching everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time guys, see ya!